And we are live. Welcome back to the After Action Project, episode 109. Tonight we are joined by David Cagle of Hardwired Tactical Shooting, and we'll be discussing their high accountability pistol program course. If you like what we're doing and would like to help support the show, visit patreon.com/afteractionproject. If you'd like to throw us some free support and appreciation, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review on iTunes. After Action Project is brought to you in part by the following sponsors and supporters. To join this esteemed group of great folks, send an email to jeremy@afteractionproject.com. The Range Buddy app is one of our show sponsors. If you haven't checked that out, it's a collection of over 160 handgun shooting drills, sorted by the required target type, filterable by the skills worked. One of the things that's kind of catching its rounds on social media again is audible start indicators versus visual indicators. And while there's no perfect solution, because it's typically not a binary decision on whether you're going to draw your handgun or you're going to press the trigger, most of the options out there are binary indicators, right? Red light go, or red light no go, green light go, those kind of sorts, the audible beep from the buzzer. However, the Range Buddy app's virtual instructor has visual indicators that include shoot or no shoot images that'll randomly pop up. That way it's not just a binary decision. If you see an image, you have to present your handgun and press the trigger. You actually have to see the image, decide whether or not it's a lethal threat that would require you to present your handgun and press the trigger on that bad guy. As well as working in audible random move commands and so much more. Check that out at rangebuddy.app. It's available on iTunes and Android, right? iOS and Android. I think I said that right. That's rangebuddy.app. Have you ever lost? And then our other show sponsor is Locked In Grip. Have you ever lost that perfect grip after shooting several rounds, or had your sweaty grip diminish the ability to hang on to your firearm in different weather conditions? Locked In Grip is a grip enhancer that keeps your hands free of moisture to create a slip-free connection to the action of shooting your firearm. Locked In Grip liquid shooting sports chalk is made for shooters by shooters. Visit lockedingrip.com. That's lockedingrip.com to purchase your liquid shooting sports chalk now. And I think next to, besides upgrading your gun, Andy, that Locked In Grip shooting sports chalk is one of those things that really helped you smoke my ass in the bill drill and a couple of the other drills that we work out there on the range. So it's a great aid. I enjoy using it out there on the range when I'm running drills. And then it's awesome to have our students use. Gives them one less thing to worry about having to reestablish that grip between strings of fire. Enough about all that stuff. Let's get into what we came. Go ahead.
Real quick, I was going to say the other option is we can give you real life training too. I think we've offered it before in the past. Fly here to Albuquerque. We'll pick you up at the airport. We'll give you a tube of Locked In Grip, drop you off in downtown Albuquerque on a Friday night, and you get the realism of realism all you want.
Yep. First, get your first stateside here in the beautiful city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We frequently rank the top 10 most violent cities in the country. Although I think every city is that way, you would see. So, but yeah, that's absolutely true. If you're on the East Coast, if you're in Florida, like where I grew up, that humidity, man, you probably really need that shooting sports chalk. So let's get into tonight's episode. We're going to be talking about David's high accountability pistol program. David, introduce yourself to our listeners. Talk to us a little bit about what got you into the firearms training world and a brief intro into the class.
Okay. That's a big question. So my name is David Cagle. I'm a full-time law enforcement officer here in the Oklahoma City area. I serve on collateral duty with a county SWAT team out here. And I just got back. I just spent the last year in Africa with the Oklahoma Army National Guard. I'm an infantryman with them. I'm a team leader in a rifle squad. So that's what I do professionally. On the private sector side, like you guys have mentioned, Daryl Bulkey and I run Hardwired Tactical Shooting. And then I teach as an adjunct instructor for Bill Rapier of AMTAC Shooting as well. The way that I kind of got into the firearms training world, it's kind of a funny story. So my dad's side of the family is from Nacogdoches, Texas. And one day I was down there and my uncle said something like, man, that Paul Howe guy has a shooting school down here. And I was like, Black Hawk Down, Paul Howe? And so I signed up for a couple of his classes when I was super young. I was like 17 or 18 when I took my first class out there. Ended up taking literally every single class that Paul did out at CSAT, Combat Shooting and Tactics, and went through his instructor course, ended up teaching for him for a little while. And that was all while I was still in college. And so that was before I was a cop or anything. So I was super lucky in that by the time I actually became a cop, I'd been working at CSAT. I was a range master certified instructor, all of that stuff. So I knew what right looked like. So that is really is a good way to start. And it's made me super passionate about training because obviously I went through with some other guys that didn't have the same experiences that I had. And so trying to open people's eyes to what good training actually looks like has kind of been the mission since then.
And what an incredibly difficult mission that must be, right? Because the spectrum on the quality of training that you can kind of stumble into as a new gun owner, or even as somebody that's entering into the police academy, right? It's just, you can get lucky and land with somebody like Paul, who knows what the hell they're doing, or you can end up in some Joe Schmo's class who's doing it for the money and doesn't know what the heck he's doing. So what does that look like as somebody that's coming in? And I'd imagine you were probably one of the top shooters in your police academy. What does that look like as some? And you probably shot better than some of the instructors. If that's maybe not, or maybe that's plead the fifth on that stuff. So what does that look like as somebody that's coming in? Was there anything that you saw that was kind of like, that's not really the best or the most efficient way to be doing this or teaching this?
All kinds of stuff. I mean, so I had a good talk with John Hearn right before I went to the academy, and he was like, man, you need to show up, not say anything, do exactly what they tell you to do, and just try and, stay off the radar, which was excellent advice. Some of the people, it was ruined because I showed up the first day and the academy coordinator was a guy that I had done a bunch of training with previously, who immediately outed me to everyone there. So didn't quite get to stay off the radar, but I mean, I was just trying not to be that guy, so didn't say much, but there's a lot of, pinning the trigger, overhand rack the pistol, because hitting the slide release is a gross motor skill that you can't do under stress. Just all of kind of the, the old wives' tales that you hear about firearms training. So, I mean, it wasn't bad. It was better than, a lot of ways that you see people doing things. I wouldn't say it was bad training. I would just say it was a little dated and some of the stuff's not current best practices.
Makes sense. Let's get into the high accountability pistol program. What is that class? What is like your overarching goal for students after coming out of this class?
So the high accountability pistol program was born because when HITS, which is what we call hardwired tactical shooting, when HITS was started, Darryl Bolke and Wayne Dobbs founded it. And the initial goal was to get quality training out to law enforcement outside of, what the norm is. And the norm, which it's the same way private sector side, is dudes on a range shooting drills statically, everyone kind of follows the same format. And there's a lot of things about flat range training that can lead to less than desired outcomes if you don't do other methods of training to supplement them. And so the high accountability pistol program basically was our answer to, okay, if all you have is a flat range, how do you introduce people to concepts that typically aren't discussed in flat range training? So things like backstop issues and muzzle awareness and a lot of things that typically you only see in kind of force on force, advanced level training. We wanted to start incorporating that into people's training way earlier, because the earlier you can start thinking about that stuff, obviously the more it'll impact the way that your training affects you and the way that you look at training. So the high accountability pistol program was basically designed as a 1-day, 8-hour class to introduce people to the concepts that we thought were important framing your mindset on how this stuff actually translates from flat range to application.
So it's an 8-hour course. What are the gear requirements? If I'm taking this class, what do I have to show up with?
So all you got to show up with is a safe, hopefully reliable handgun that will not blow up on the range. Honestly, 50 to 100 rounds. It's a super low round count class. In the TACCON version, which we taught a 4-hour version at TACCON, I think the TACCON guys each shot like 10 rounds each in 4 hours, which sounds crazy, but if you get the format, it makes a lot more sense. And so really just basic range stuff, pistol, eyes, ears, a little bit of ammo, and we provide all the other stuff. So,
I've said it before. One of the things that I talked about when I first started, taking classes and really getting into it, I was looking for, I thought high round count courses were the thing to go to. And then I took a couple, and then I've taken some other classes with considerably much lower round count requirements. And I found that that's really where those are really the courses that I like to be in, right? I like to be in a class that's going to be a lower round count, not because my hands get hurt, but there's a lot of learning that takes place in between the rounds that are getting fired. So 50 to 100 rounds over an 8-hour day. What are some of the concepts that you're really digging in with students between the shooting drills?
So the main thing is obviously high accountability, which is not only being accountable for the rounds that you fire, but being accountable for the force decisions that you're making, for where your muzzle is presented, for all of the things that we kind of take for granted in standard range training. So there's a lot of maybe presenting to a low ready instead of presenting directly onto a threat, getting guys to think, hey, every time you draw this pistol doesn't automatically mean that you're going to use the pistol, which people get a little iffy about that on the private citizen side. But Oklahoma, for example, recently changed their statutes where it's not brandishing. If you present a pistol to a low ready in a self-defense, if it's justified to present a pistol and you present one to a low ready, obviously you're not going to be penalized for not shooting somebody. That is now, it's not, felony brandishing or assault with a deadly weapon like it used to be, felony pointing of a firearm, however your penal code defines it. But that's actually protected by law in Oklahoma now. And it's like that in a lot of other states too. So I'm a big proponent of presenting to the low ready for my line of work. For police work, I've presented to low ready about 99.99% of the time that I've ever drawn my pistol in real life. So that kind of stuff. So, hey, maybe we're not just working straight from the holster, presenting directly onto the threat. Maybe we're working other things. If there's multiple threats or multiple people involved, do they all get a muzzle pointed at them? Well, not if you can't justify it, because it absolutely is assault with a deadly weapon if you point a firearm at somebody who doesn't deserve it just because their buddy did something stupid. So things like that, minding your muzzle, making sure your backstop's clear. We'll put targets in front and behind and have people do target discrimination and things like that. So it's basically just working with what you got. And it's like, okay, if you only have a flat range, you still need to be thinking about these things, because what we've seen translated is when you take guys who have only done flat range training ever, and then you put them in actual use of force decision-making situations, if all they've ever done is standard flat range training, they are going to treat that situation basically like a flat range if that's all they know. So you got to give people other skills, even if, they just simply don't have access to a quality force on force class or, the other things that some of the training junkies in the industry say you will get murdered without. So.
But we've taken force on force classes, a couple, Jeremy and myself, and, typically everybody wants to shoot each other, and then it brings those challenges of, no matter what it is, somebody's going to shoot somebody, and then you start to lose the value of the class. And so I think it's important to make sure that we have those decision-making skills added to just flat range training, like you said. So you mentioned that you bring other gear along. Do you guys do any form of like force on force or cert pistols, airsoft, anything like that, or is it just basically discussion with what you bring?
So not in this class. In this class, it is a straight live fire, and we have follow-on training that, you know, if clients want to do that, we can do that, obviously. But with high accountability, it is just straight flat range live fire, and there's not really a need for certs and sims and stuff like that, because with the way we designed it, it was like, hey, if you don't have access to those tools, because that's what I kept saying was, I work for a smaller agency. All of the smaller agencies around me, they're like, hey, that's great, but we don't have any of that stuff. We don't have access to that stuff. So are we just supposed to basically hang our guys out to dry? So it's intentionally not using any of that.
That makes sense. And it's interesting to see kind of how these conversations are coming out and about. And one of the things that we were talking about in the pre-show was, you know, audible start signals versus visual start signals. And we're getting a lot closer, and there's a lot of guys that are working on kind of adding I don't know if it's solving that part of the problem, but adding the complexity to kind of what we're doing on the flat range and the square range, and really working with the limitations. John Hearn, John Holshin, you know, a lot of these guys are working on, and there's a couple other guys. Mike Ox does a ton of stuff with visual cues and whatnot. And I think one of the limiting factors that we're still faced with is that, kind of as you mentioned, it's not always going to be, shooting is not always going to be the solution to that. And we know, right, it's obvious to us that the fewer decisions that you have to make, the faster you're going to be able to make the decision, right? So if it's a shoot or no shoot, that's a binary yes or no, right? Or is it, do I have an avenue of escape? Can I draw my handgun in this situation? Are there other people around? Adding all of those things into the decision-making process will slow our abilities down, right? And we probably would see that in the real world, right? Like if you're in a life-threatening self-defense encounter, you still have to account for all these things. Absolutely. And right now, I think we're still missing it in practice and in training, just because there really isn't an easy way to do that. You know, in kind of the ad spiel, we talked about the Range Buddy app, and that's one of those things that I tried to get us a little bit closer, or to get myself a little bit closer to that, right? Because one of the things that I've talked with Andy about and some other instructors is that it's not a binary decision, and it's, you know, gunfights are somewhat random, right? You're not, you know, outside of spousal stuff, right? It's if you're attacked at an ATM, right? So it's, how do we solve because you get students on the range, and it's a prescribed drill, right? Hey, it's going to be 3 rounds. Even if you do the, you know, threat, if you do the lasers, there are still those limitations. So what are some other tactics? What have you seen, some ways for us to kind of build in that complexity to the shooting component of it when we're on the square range? So
that's a great question. So the way that we're running it is, I should have said this. There was one extra piece of gear. You asked what gear people needed to come to class. We ask people to bring a photo of their loved one. And then someone brings, you know, a picture of their kid, a picture of their wife. Well, we take those and we staple them onto the faces of the non-shoot targets. So the non-shoots that we have, we put pictures of, okay, you know, that's this guy's wife, that's this guy's kid. And then we talk to them and we're like, hey, are you okay with someone putting a muzzle on your kid? And it kind of changes the mindset of how people do things like that. And so the ways that we incorporate that is, like I was talking about, Rule 4 stuff. So we'll have non-shoots in front. We'll have non-shoots placed behind different areas, making people find, you know, the correct angles that they're not going to have a backstop problem. And while guys are doing that, we don't allow them to just muzzle everything, because that's what you see a lot. And this isn't a knock on, I just shot a USPSA match like 3 weeks ago. Like, I'm not against any of that stuff, but when you see guys who have only shot like USPSA matches and stuff like that, they run around and they're pointing at every target because that's the game. That's what you do. And so we try and get guys used to things like, hey, when you're moving to get the angle on this guy, like you can't just be muzzling all of these non-shoots while you're looking for your correct lane and things like that. And just that alone, trying to get dudes not to muzzle the non-shoots while they're moving is quite a task if you've never done that. And everyone has the same reaction. Everyone is like, I guarantee you there's people listening to this and they're like, I wouldn't do that. Like I wouldn't muzzle the non-shoot, of course. I am far too trained. And what you see is as soon as we have this much discrimination, because we have discrimination targets as well, it's not guaranteed you're going to have a shoot or non-shoot. So not only are dudes moving to try and identify the correct lane, but first they have to identify whether or not it's even a shoot target. And again, we're on a flat range, so these are pieces of cardboard. But even with the pieces of cardboard, you induce that much stress on a dude and they just start doing crazy stuff. And so, for example, at TACCon, I mentioned we did a 4-hour block, and I was talking to one of our students, and the student did a great job, but we start them facing up range. So I was facing down range, getting ready to watch the whole thing, and they start facing up range. So I'm face to face with this person, and, you know, on the beep, they're going to turn around, assess what they have, and do their thing. So I'm face to face with this person. I'm like, hey, what is the number one thing we're going to try and do on this? And they're like, we're not going to immediately draw and muzzle every target. And I was like, correct. As soon as I hit the beep, turns around, super fast draw, just points a gun at everything. Literally 5 seconds after telling me that. So it's the kind of stuff that on the internet, people will act like it's an afterthought and say, well, people don't need to drill things like that because obviously they're not going to muzzle a non-shoot in real life or whatever just because they shot B8s. And in practice, I have seen that not to be the case. And especially, I have seen a lot of cops point guns at quite literally everything under the sun. And, you know, as much as people want to hate on the police, most cops have a lot more experience than most armed citizens actually, you know, using firearms and use of force decision making. And those dudes don't do too hot if they don't have a solid base of training before. So that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about, just trying to get guys thinking about it. Like, and where this comes from, I know I'm kind of going on a long rant here, just trying to explain a class, but this comes from both Daryl and my personal experience. So unfortunately, I was involved in a gunfight pretty early on in my career that involved some serious use of force decision making. It's a crazy story. We do a whole debrief class on that as well. That's a couple hours long. But basically, there were multiple times through this where I had to decide whether, you know, this is a shoot, whether this is a non-shoot, as situations are unfolding right in front of me. And luckily, I was able to make some pretty solid decisions, and things went very well. But that was 100% because, and I tell people, I literally could hear Paul Howe in my head as I'm going through doing stuff, going through the discrimination process. Identify whole person, hand, waistline. Like, that's just what I did because I had been working at CSAT before. Like, I had done that in his shoot house 1,000 times. Target discriminations built into everything that Paul does down there in Texas. And so the fact that that was where my training was based off of led to a very positive outcome for me personally. So I obviously feel very strongly about incorporating that into my own training and the training that we give to our students, because I've seen it lead to the right things happening. Daryl's obviously seen it lead to the right things happening. So it's stuff that we think is lacking.
Yeah, I see some of that stuff too. When we teach class, you know, I tell everybody about the farthest I go in with law enforcement as I watch On Patrol live pretty often, right? And I'm kind of just judging every law enforcement guy that draws his gun, and I see where the muzzle goes, and
Yep.
Just kind of stuff like that stuff. And so you're absolutely right. The amount of times you see it, and then there's a pretty good amount of times you see it done right, where they slow things down and all that. But anyway, going back to this whole trigger of like sound versus lights and all that, and as Jeremy said, there's really not a right answer, but I wanted your perspective. For me, I think I think really we're overthinking this to where it's not so much about the light, it's not so much about the sound, it's all about the thought process. It's all about the thinking of it. However way you choose to do it, you've got to come up with the thinking. Because I'm the same. I recently did a class, Riley Bowman, shooting and moving and shooting, and you're walking straight down the line, you're shooting, and then he says, okay, holster up, and you see somebody with a gun about to turn around to say, hey, how'd I do? And we just talked about holster up before you turn around, and it just, it happens because you're in that learning mode. Now you take in life or death situation, and as you mentioned, the whole world falls apart. So do you agree with that, or do you think there's a different method? Or, I mean, this is something that's kind of being talked about on the internet right now. Again, it's, we often recycle stuff like this.
I just read about that. Fun fact, Riley Bowman actually was one of our students at TACCON that took this block. So yeah, Riley's an awesome dude. I love what he's doing. But as far as the visual versus auditory stuff, I think it is super important to determine whether we're talking about a drill or a scenario, because guys will talk about one thing like it's both, and drills and scenarios do not accomplish the same thing. It's like when guys watch you shoot a bill drill and they're like, well, you're programming yourself to shoot a guy 6 times every time. It's like, no, this is a bill drill that's working on recoil management, allowing me to track my sights quickly, blah, blah, blah. Like, this isn't a scenario. I'm not saying, look, this is my target engagement strategy for every person that I, decide I'm going to shoot. I'm going to bill drill them. And so the guys that are talking about the auditory versus visual stuff, they'll talk about aspects like it's both. And just from a drill perspective, I think, that's probably a good thing to mix up having a beep from a timer and then having lights or something like that, like Holshin and Hearn and the guys over at Centrifuge. They all use stuff like that. And I think that's good. I don't think it is the end of the world either way. I think sometimes on the internet, guys make things into bigger deals than they are. And so guys will have a good idea, like, hey, we should switch up the go signal for this drill and like use a light or something instead of a beep. And then some other dude will be like, that is a really good idea. If we don't start doing this, we're all going to die. And the training is now useless if we don't all incorporate this in every single thing that we do. And so I think there's a middle ground. I think if you have access to that stuff, it's awesome. The Centrifuge guys use the Blaze Pods. If you guys have seen those, they're like little lights and you can program them to light up different colors and have multiple in different areas and stuff. It's perfect for that kind of stuff. And I think it's a useful tool, but I don't think that your training is useless without it, which goes back to the whole point of high accountability pistol, which was, hey, if I'm just a dude who has cardboard targets and a shot timer, how can I try and get my guys thinking about use of force constitutionally? So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it did indeed. How far do you guys shoot out to in this class?
Oh, it's all pretty close. I would say 15 and in for sure. Because that's one of those things. The further you get back, there's already priority of fire issues. If you're talking about shooting into a crowd, like any of the like church security and things like that, you're already talking about an insanely chaotic situation. And the further back that you get, the easier it is for dudes to basically, cross over and jump in front of you. And so I think if you're much further than, 5 or 7 yards back, that's probably not the tactical move to take a shot in an environment like that. So all of the stuff that we're talking about with finding lanes, like in an ideal world, we would get directly online with everyone and never shoot past anyone. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that in reality. So we're just trying to show guys we're trying to mitigate the risk as much as possible. So it's all pretty close on that end as far as moving around targets and finding lanes to shoot from and stuff like that. So nothing too crazy. You're not going to, if you can't pass the no-fail Pressburg drill, you can still come to our class.
You can find that drill in the Range Buddy app. That's the it's one of those things that we look at. The other thing I think we're really good at doing in the training industry is we're looking at the outliers, right? And we say, oh, well, now we have to do a 40, if we have to do the Dickens drill, right? And it's like, maybe you don't work on the Dickens drill if you can't shoot a bill drill clean. And so you're talking about you don't have to pass you don't have to pass that drill to attend this class. Is there a minimum skill set that students need to have outside of being able to safely handle their handgun?
So, Super Test is on the Range Buddy app, right? So the Super Test, that's our drill. Daryl and Wayne invented that. They came up with that a while ago, but we would like for guys to be able to shoot like a 270 or above on a Super Test, which if any of the listeners aren't familiar, it's at 15 yards. You have 15 seconds to shoot 10 rounds on a B8. 10 yards, 10 rounds, 10 seconds, 5 yards, 10 rounds, 5 seconds. So it doesn't go past 15. This is a long-winded way of saying you should be able to make solid hits on an anatomically correct target, which is about the size of the black on a B8, from 15 and in. And if you can do that, you are good to go.
Yeah, the Range Buddy app, you just log your hits and it'll calculate the score for you. Yeah, that's nice. That's interesting to hear, right? Because oftentimes we'll get folks or we'll get instructors in here, and there's not necessarily a minimum. Generally, we get hey, we can work with anybody for most classes, right? Because then there are much more of those classes than there are intermediate courses when we're really starting to dive into these topics and these skill sets that, hey, we're going to be pressure testing your abilities out here on the square range, and understand that you're going to be pressure tested even more in a real life situation. So if you have this minimum skill set, that you need to have this minimum skill set so that we can work with you in that class. What are you looking for? Do you have the students shoot the Super Test at the end of the class or at some point during the course to kind of gauge skill progression?
So we have another thing called the Hardwired Tactical, I think skills assessment drill, something. I'm going to get the name of it wrong, but it's basically just a quick little shot cold warm-up drill consisting of some failure drills shot at various yard lines and things, just to kind of assess where people are at. Because like you're talking about, when I say we would like for people to be able to do that, we know that not everyone who shows up to a class is going to be at a certain skill level, and we absolutely will work with whoever shows up. So yeah, we shoot a little drill at the very beginning just to kind of see where guys are at, and then base, because we set up the targets initially and things like that. And I'm not going to give a guy a super difficult problem if he doesn't have a decent skill set to handle that, because we still want to get him some training value and, meet him where he's at. So yeah, we have them shoot certain things through the class, but if you show up with whatever skill level you have, really the concepts are what's important about the class. It's like, people think they're going to show up to a class and get better marksmanship wise. It's really the practicing of the stuff that you learn in class that makes you better, which obviously you guys know. And so I wouldn't say that somebody shouldn't show up necessarily if they can't meet that number on the Super Test or whatever. But on the flip side, drills versus scenarios and all that, if guys haven't built a minimum level of competence with their pistol, they probably don't need to be thinking about the tactical application of the pistol in general. I would say work on that stuff first, because all of this stuff is stair-stepped, right? Until you get to a base level of competence, maybe this isn't the class for you, which is okay. And that was another thing when we decided to teach high accountability pistol at TacCon. Daryl and I were talking, and because we got asked to teach at TacCon first, obviously. And I'm like, well, I've got Tim Herron there teaching performance pistol shooting. Perhaps I should not be the guy that's doing another performance pistol shooting class to compete with Grandmaster Tim Herron. And so we were trying to think, what's in our lane that we bring to people that, these other guys aren't. Like Wayne Dobbs was there teaching critical skills and drills, whatever his fundamental block is called. And Wayne teaches fundamental pistol craft better than me. So I'm like, well, we have guys meeting this, and this need. So, kind of the decision making and the use of force context built on already having a base level of skill with the pistol is where Daryl and I felt our experience lended to the best with it. So it's scalable is the too long didn't read of that.
And it's refreshing to hear that, because more people need to hear that. If you don't have, if you can't hit this minimum skill set with your hand, maybe you don't need to be worrying about scenarios and all the what if situations in your life that you might come up with. And maybe you should get your butt back out there on the range and really develop those skills so that it's applicable in your real life. And by the way, it's applicable in everybody's life, because we don't get to choose the scenario that we're in. If we have to use our handgun to save our life or the life of a loved one or some stranger in a mall, right? We don't get to choose that. And the easiest, kind of antidote for that for me is like, hey, if you need to use your sights and you don't know how to use them, you have to take a highly accountable shot or a precision shot at distance, a small target, or whatever the situation might be. Well, you're screwed. Conversely, if you know how to use your sights and you don't need them, there's no negative outcome to that, right? It's irrelevant. It's easy to get hung up. I think it's easy for folks to get hung up on a lot of the stuff that is not yet relevant to where they are at on their spectrum of skill set, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the things about the training industry that just, like, if you talk to any marketing dude ever, they're like, don't call your class basic, don't call it a fundamentals class, don't call it this or this, because people won't show up. And it's like, I get it from that standpoint, but like, fundamentals are what all of us should be reinforcing all the time, because there's no real advanced skills. There's just the fundamentals done at a high level, which you guys have done enough training to know that that's it. There's literally no magic to this stuff. Nobody can teach you that. And I think the more of a solid foundation, that Daryl calls it what you build your house on. And the longer that you spend focused on the hard skills, on building your fundamental skills of spending time doing the not cool stuff, the better you absolutely perform doing the cool guy stuff later. So it's absolutely worth that continual investment and a massive investment in the beginning. I see way too many dudes trying to jump into things that should probably be a little further down the progression for them. And normally that's where I see dudes have the biggest negatives to their training, because if you show up to a class, like dudes that don't, we saw this all the time teaching at CSAT with Paul. I would see dudes showing up for like a shoot house class and their flat range skills are not up to par. So not only are they not able to take in the shoot house training well, but they are building negative reps in their marksmanship skills and all that, because their head is just everywhere. And so you're burning not only not good reps, you are burning bad reps towards your skill set for, 2 days, 5 days, whatever guys are signed up for. So,
well, not only that, when I take a class, these classes are expensive. Let's be honest. Especially if you're flying like we do, you got flights, you got hotels, you got food, you got ammo, you got all these things. And then you go into a class, and here's a little bit of reality from somebody who takes a lot of classes. When you have that student and you see them struggling, it's frustrating, because honestly, the only way I can tell you is you're slowing the class down for everybody most of the time, and learning, it makes learning difficult. And by all means, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that if you don't have those skills, you shouldn't take courses. You need to take the right courses. And that's kind of where we're at, right? Take the right courses before you start trying to roll in the dirt and, get into shoot houses and waste your money, honestly.
Absolutely. And another thing, so we've talked a lot on the show so far about like stupid things you hear on the internet, is guys will be like, oh, so by promoting, X class, you're saying that, the recently divorced mom who has the abusive ex or whatever shouldn't carry a gun until she can, pass a no fail or something like that, and every time it's like, that's not the use case that we're talking about. And that person is probably not who we're discussing signing up for HIT's high accountability pistol anyways. Like, everyone has a different use case. And if you have a real threat to your life and the only thing you can do is present a pistol at 3 yards and get a hit somewhere on the target, that works for a lot of problems in reality. Like Claude Werner talks about, dudes with zero training have a lot of success all the time. But we're not talking about dudes who have no other option than to go into a situation with no training. We're talking about the dudes who are putting forethought into getting their training. So that's another thing that I hate, is when people conflate the two. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because if we look at it, statistically speaking, you don't need any firearms training, because the vast majority of successful folks, like civilians who are successful in their defensive gun use, have zero training. However, right, that's not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the statistical unlikelihood within something that is already statistically unlikely. However, if I'm at Walmart with my wife and kids and some dude decides to come in there after robbing the local stop and rob and shoot up the place, right? I want to be able to take that. I want to be able to be successful in the least likely of situations, right? Because that kind of covers everything up to and including that situation. And it's one of those things, like you said, people conflate the two, and it's like, man, that's not. We need to understand something. If you're going to seek training, you've already kind of made the internal decision that you might need something that's a little bit better than Joe Schmo getting lucky in his gunfight, firing off 10 or 15 rounds and hitting the dude 2 or 3 times. So let's stop talking about and stop worrying about all this other stuff. It's like the 3 feet, 3 yards, 3 seconds. I get it. That's statistically what's most likely going to be needed. But what if I need to put 5 rounds at 5 yards?
Yep. Well, it's like Tom Givens talks about, his student-involved shootings, all of his students that have been in gunfights after training with him. And is like, most of these guys, it's like 7 yards, 5 yards, blah, 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 till you hit the guy who had to shoot a dude with a rifle at 22 yards. And it's like, it doesn't matter to that guy if you're like, well, statistically, all the other people had to do this. It's like, well, this guy had to do this, and the odds for him were 100%. So that day, 100% of the shots he was going to have to take were at 22 yards. So all fighting, this kind of gets into a bigger concepts, but all fighting is just odds anyways. Anyone can beat anyone at fighting technically at any time. Like a UFC fighter could technically lose to some dude with zero training, but the odds of that happening are pretty low. So it's the kind of thing that you have to accept that going into it. Like squared away cops get shot by dudes literally full on sprinting down an alleyway and blind firing behind them. Like that happens every year. Like dudes with tons of training, in the Middle East will get aced by some dude with an AK literally pointed over his head. Like that's the reality of fighting. So if you want to go into it with, you don't need any training or you need all the training in the world, like all the training in the world just bumps those odds up for you.
And the Jedi's analogies, there's a couple of them that I like, when he talks about draw to first shot and he says, people don't need a sub 2 second draw to first shot. Well, you do if you have a 2 second problem, right? And the whole, line break thing, if I break your line on your eye socket, is it going to matter? So those things are good. And for me, the other side of this whole deal, just wrapping it up, is taking a lot of training. There's still like an internal fear for me that in the unlikely event that I ever get involved into another situation and I fail, and then I have this whole thought of like, look at all this training you've done, Andy, and you lost that fight, right? So there's that whole thing in the head internally, like you're saying, no matter how good you are, is there an opportunity to be better? Yeah. And then, instead of trying to make it so serious, just turn it into something fun, become that enthusiast and enjoy something that keeps you out of trouble. It's kind of my thought.
And that whole thing. So swinging back to high accountability pistol, like making it fun for dudes is an important thing. But like with high accountability pistol, the target discrimination that we do, since it's based off of, doing this with limited resources, we'll use, an IPSC target or the standard ILFE silhouette that everyone uses, something like that. And we'll just put a couple of different pieces of tape. And we're like, okay, one piece of tape means this, two pieces of tape means this, and three means this. And that's how we'll have people do the target discrimination. And it's like, is that a direct translation to reality? Like, our dude's going to be walking around with two pieces of tape on them? No, but it's just about getting guys thinking about things. And it really turns out to be pretty fun for a lot of people who haven't done that kind of stuff in their training, because we had a bunch of dudes. So we referenced Tim Herron like 5 times on this podcast so far. He was actually one of our students in there. I think he had a lot of fun. Like, guys who just don't typically shoot in those kinds of environments. It's good for guys to, get outside the thing that they typically do and start thinking about, okay, how am I going to do this when I have to put a little thought into it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I did speaking of TACCON, I was with I did Eric Gelhaus's class, and it was based on the same thing. He put some silhouettes in front, had a steel rack in the back, painted one. I think they were all white, one was red. And he said, okay, shoot that one. I'm gonna hit the timer, and you go, just don't muzzle the silhouettes. And it turned into, he made fun of me, which was funny. He's like, I make fun of Andy because I know him, but he's like, Andy, are you on Jeopardy? Because we were here all day waiting for you to shoot. And like, I got to where now I'm overthinking it, because it's like, I don't want to muzzle anything. And it's like, yeah, but, and then that's that, that whole thing on the internet. Well, the targets aren't shooting back at you. Right. But
Yep.
yeah, anyway, having that thought process, it kind of messed me up, even just that little 4-hour block of way overthinking things to where I didn't mess up. And then you realize
Eric's
how slow you're going.
Yeah, Eric's stuff is very similar, because we have a lot of the same influences, obviously. Eric's awesome. And yeah, his Rule 4 class that he did at TACCON, a lot of the same concepts. And like you're talking about, dudes are like, oh, well, they're not even shooting back. It's like, well, if you perform like that against the cardboard or the steel plate rack, imagine if they were shooting back. So, you got to start somewhere. And it's not an everything or nothing kind of deal, which is, I hate that. Guys are like, all training is invalid unless it's simunitions, force on force, or, the flip side of that. And I did a whole podcast one time talking about just the things that I think are wrong with simunitions training, because it turns into a game of paintball the way that most instructors do it. And so there's problems with everything. You're never going to find a perfect way to train for the exact scenario that you're going to be in. And to tell another kind of personal story, so I was at the Revolver Roundup, which is another class that Hits does. This was before I worked for him. So this would have been, I think, the 2020 Revolver Roundup that Daryl and Wayne and the crew were teaching. And Daryl was talking to me, and he was like, hey man, it's never going to be like you think it's going to be in your head. He's like, your fight is not going to look like anything that you imagine it to be, because reality is chaos. And those 3 words, reality is chaos, that has really stuck with me, because literally 1 month after that was when I was involved in my gunfight. And that's the best way to describe it that there is reality is chaos. So you have to give people the most amount of tools so that they have to do the least amount of thinking in the moment. And that's what we want to do, is not have a dude's first time ever being like, okay, should I be at a low ready? Should I be muzzling this guy? If I have to move, where should my muzzle be? Like, those are not the kinds of things you can think about during use of force incidents, because I promise there is enough to consider anyways. Like, there are enough things that you have to think about that if you don't have those tools beforehand, it's not going to go good. And Andy, like you were talking about, like, you see dudes with this much stress put on them that perform differently than they say in the Facebook comments section. So That's why we feel so strongly about it.
That makes sense, and I think we'd all agree. And if somebody disagrees, they haven't been in a class where they've had to think about something other than, drawing the handgun, pointing it at the target, and firing 2 or 3 rounds.
Yep.
Because the minute hey, this is what we're going to do. You give them 2 targets, and you see their skills diminish. And now they have to distinguish, okay, if I'm shooting the target on the left, is it a shooter or no shoot? If the target on the right, is it a shooter or no shoot? Everything kind of starts to fall off. And a lot of people like to talk about force on force like it's the be all and end all of stuff. And I'm like, I don't think force on force should be something necessarily a measure of your skills and abilities with the handgun. It should be more so focused on making you think and make good decisions with your gun. But like Andy said, they typically turn into a shoot fest. And as a role player, I was like, man, I want to win this. So I'm gaming it. So the role player is not acting like a bad guy would act. The good guy isn't acting like the good guy would act. So as you said, right, there's no perfect system or solution for it. I think if you go to a reputable instructor and you take a good class, you're going to weed out 85% of the other stuff. And I think, the other 15% is just kind of what we're stuck with. We can't put people in real life gunfights to train them for real life gunfights. Force on force is a game. You cannot, yes, it will induce a higher level of stress, but your brain knows you are not going to die. This might hurt a lot, but you're not going to die. So it's not the same.
And that's the main thing that, well, there's a lot of things about Sims specifically. One, if you don't have a guy who knows exactly how to build a proper force on force scenario, you're just going to give guys training scars more than anything, because not having hard scripted role players is a massive issue, because as soon as you get that role player that just wants to win, it's a whole thing. And that's not the same as like the centrifuge guys so I went through VCQB instructor a little while back, and they have a thing where they call micro fights, which is like, okay, there's a dude at either end of the car and they're both going to, try and tag the other one first. That's not what I'm talking about, because that's a drill, not a scenario. But in actual force on force, like scenario based training, your role players have to know exactly what they're supposed to do based off of your actions. And the scenarios in an ideal world are designed where if the good dude does the right thing, he wins, because confidence is a massively important thing, especially in, any kind of scenario based training. There are training companies out there that have a lot of force on force classes that are literally just scaring people out of carrying a gun, because it's like, look, I could design a scenario all day, every day where you lose. I could design a million scenarios where you lose every single time, but that's not the same thing. The last thing on that is, like, you talked about dudes do not react the same. Of course, they don't react the same. One, sim guns don't shoot the same as live guns, which upsets the Sims only crowd. If you don't have solid flat range skills, they absolutely don't shoot the same. And dudes do crazy. You can watch the Sims in flight, so you can absolutely point shoot with a sim gun. Doesn't work that way in real life. But more than that, like, dudes doing like quick peeks, like poking their heads out of doors and stuff. Like, no one does that when you might poke your head out and actually get it blown off. So of course there are training scars, which again, like, there's training scars with everything. But there are some dudes who are like, look, I don't have real world experience doing this or that, but I've been vetted force on force, and that's the exact same thing. And I'm always like, maybe not the exact same thing. That might be a bit of an overstatement. So,
yeah, there's with force on force too. I'll tell you how not nerd I am. Right, I played Dungeons and Dragons one time as a kid, and the dungeon master, whatever the hell his name was, me and my best friend played him, and he just kicked our ass nonstop. Like, no matter how good you get, he always wins. And I feel like that's what force on force is. It's kind of like it's Gun Guide Dungeons and Dragons, because one example is we had a scenario where I was the bad guy. I had guy's wife around the neck, and I had a knife to her throat, and about this much of my face was showing, and he pressed the trigger and he shot me right in the face, right? And I was like, at first everybody's like, dang, that was awesome. I'm like, but you wouldn't have taken that shot if that was really your wife. Oh yeah, I would have. Right. I'm like, there's no way. So overconfidence also comes into play to where these scenarios just kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that. Like, it goes back to every single thing that we do adds to the toolbox of hopefully making us holistically more prepared. Like, our straight flat range training, incorporating some concepts into the flat range. Then once all that stuff is solid and we understand it, then trying to go and do some things in, more dynamic environments. Like, it all adds to each other. And if you don't have guys that understand how that adds to each other, you're going to have a bad time. And dudes that show up to force on force classes just because they're like, oh, I want to shoot this dude and I want to have some dude shoot back at me. Like, those guys should go play paintball and they would get more of what they want out of it.
Yeah. So getting back to your class, which is the reason why we're here, we got off on a few tangents, but I think all these are really valuable. So would you say this class kind of eliminates a lot of those things to create, all in all, just more of a thought process of what you're doing versus square range, draw, shoot, do a drill. And that's what it's coming down to. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the idea, is like, there's certain obviously teaching points that we look for when a student's doing a run on certain drills. And it's like, okay, this dude turns around, starts to take things in. Does he immediately draw his pistol? Well, if you immediately draw your pistol before you even see a threat, that is 100% brandishing. And as a private citizen, you are absolutely taking the ride for that one. Especially these days, 50 people will call the cops on you before they're even reholstered. So we're looking, do guys draw before they need to? Okay. If they did identify a threat and they draw, did they muzzle the non-shoots before they figured out where they were going to shoot from, or if they could even take the shot? We're looking, if kind of putting those two things together, when guys draw, do they immediately go on to target? Do they wait until they have a plan to draw? Like, all of these different little things, you'll see dudes do every single combination. And so it's like, with just the stuff we're talking about, shooter, cardboard targets, and some tape, I can induce 50 different variables on you. And so until guys can handle that, you're not ready to move on to some other stuff. And so it's all part of the building block there. But we have so many little things, the little concepts that we're trying to instill in guys that should be fundamental, but are not. Like, there are dudes at TACCon, and I don't use the word training junkie as a negative. I've probably just taken more random classes than about anybody. But, you get the training junkie dudes show up that are like, I have done 25 classes with this guy. I have X number of hours of training, but they went to the same kinds of classes the whole time. It's like, I've done Kyle DeFore, Steve Fisher, Chuck Presper, Bill Rapier's, like all these guys' fundamental pistol shooting class. So they're like, fundamentals of pistol shooting is fine, but they took the same kind of class from all of these different guys. So they still only have one skill set. Does that make sense? And so those dudes show up and they just, they get destroyed as soon as we start talking about some of these concepts. So
what do you think the biggest obstacle for students in this class is?
Biggest obstacle, I mean, just thinking with a gun in general, but the one that we see dudes mess up the most, just the muzzle awareness, because that is the hardest one for guys that are not in military or law enforcement. They probably never worked moving with the gun around other people, the people in this scenario being cardboard IPSC targets. But like, guys just don't work movement and muzzle awareness like that. Like, there's a lot of really spun up dudes who are serious about training and have done a lot, never worked on that stuff because it's not a skill set that's involved in much of the private citizen training. So as soon as we tell guys, look, you are not allowed to muzzle X target, which has, by the way, has a picture of the dude standing next to you's wife on it. People screw that up. And so, for example, we don't do a lot of scenarios that have more than one shoot targets, just because we're trying to keep it, somewhat grounded and not go into total tactical fantasy band camp of like, it's the coordinated terrorist attack at the mall right now. That's your Navy SEAL Casey Ryback from the 90s movie Under Siege. Like we try not to get into that. But if we do have more than one shoot target, what we see dudes do is, even when they get it completely right and they're like, okay, I turn around, I'm looking, oh, I have an identified shoot target. I either draw to a low ready and then move off and engage, or I move off and then draw and engage. They do everything perfectly. They don't muzzle a non-shoot. As soon as they shoot the first target, as soon as actual shooting occurs and the live fire happens, all out the window. And so then after they've done that, they're just muzzling everyone on the planet looking for that second target. So just little things like that. It's the muzzling. The muzzle awareness is the number one thing that we see dudes really, really struggle with.
You had finger on the trigger with that too, even if they draw low ready, finger on the trigger.
Yep, all the time. And that's one of those things that it's not like, you can't even fault dudes, because again, for all my friends out here listening, I'm not anti-competition whatsoever. But if the only thing you've done is shoot USPSA stages with 20 targets, and the whole time as you're transitioning between targets, your fingers on the trigger the whole time and all that stuff, of course that's what you're going to do in the kind of class we're talking about, because that's what you have 1,000 reps doing. Not a negative on the sport of USPSA. It's like, that's how that impacts this different context. And so yes, we see dudes finger on the trigger as they're moving, muzzle, not as they're moving, as they're moving between targets, muzzling as they're moving between targets, all the standard stuff that guys just haven't thought about.
When we're talking about, I don't want to lump discourse into what I'm about to ask a question about, but I'm sure you've seen the videos where, most recently it's a female student and the instructor's pouring water. They're shoving her, side to side, and she's out there with a gun, and she's bang, bang, bang. And then they got a stick. And all of that, I would imagine, is in their goal is to make this as stressful as possible. It's induce some real world stress into this shooter and watch the wheels fall off. Are there things that you're seeing similar to that where we're just kind of missing the mark? And then how do you counter that with your course offering?
Yeah. So stress for the sake of stress, I do not think is generally useful for the kind of stuff that we're talking about. Just building hard skills. I don't think you get a lot out of that kind of stuff, which you see, and it's like, well, this is what it's like in reality, blah, blah, blah. Well, dudes aren't pouring water on you and forcing a stick inside your ejection port in real life. Well, and so if guys don't understand the right way to incorporate that, it becomes a big problem. And that's what we always tell people is, with high accountability pistol in particular, it's none of that stuff. All we're doing is putting pieces of tape on some cardboard targets and putting them in a weird order. We're not screaming at you. We're not yelling at you. Nothing else is different. You're just standing on a flat pistol range, shooting at these targets while thinking about some of the use of force context that goes with it. And so for the guys out there that are like, well, it's not real training, and unless, X number of things are happening and all that kind of stuff, like you're talking about in those videos, like, well, you should see what the piece of tape on the cardboard does to these people, because it induces the stress that we're looking for. But it's to a point. It's not just doing it for the sake of doing it to, send you to Navy SEAL for a day camp. It's getting you to think about the things we're trying to get you to think about. So I think that's the main difference between what you're talking about and what we're trying to do, is all of the stress that comes from it is mostly put on the student by themselves. because personally, I don't care if you muzzle an on-shoot in the class. Like, I'm going to correct you because I'm the instructor and I'm trying to teach you something. But you, as a student, from what we see, put way more pressure and stress on yourself. Especially that's where like the photos that we put on targets comes from, because like the first time a dude doesn't clear a target enough and accidentally shoots a non-shoot target that's got a picture of his infant on it, like people freak out and you'll see it on their face. Like they're just completely shaken up for the whole day. And it's a whole thing. So podcast going here. I want a podcast out of here. Sorry. Oh, light.
She said,
That light
I'll
on.
teach you.
Sorry.
No worries. That we will.
Like I
edit
said,
out post.
I got back from Africa, so I haven't turned my Wi-Fi back on yet. So over at my parents' house at the moment.
Nice.
But sorry, lost my train of thought there. But
No, you
yeah,
answered this question beautifully.
I mean that's the whole thing is the stress. Most dudes put the stress on themselves.
Hey, another rabbit hole thing on that, David. So did a Citizens Academy recently. We went out to the range, went to the SWAT guys, went to the academy, and they were telling us about how they induce that stress to the rookies, you know, screaming at them, push-ups and all that stuff. Is that still valid training for law enforcement, doing the kind of screaming in your face, stress induction stuff, or is that
Well,
dated?
again, I think it depends on the context. At some point in the academy, absolutely, you have to put people under stress and see how they react and things like that. But during the basic firearms portion, you know, these guys have 40 hours, maybe 80 hours of taking someone who's never shot a gun from zero to hero. You don't have time to do things like that. And so you'll see a lot of that kind of stuff put in, like applied inconsistently. So like the way I mentioned centrifuge, the way that Will Petty builds malfunction drills, you know, like with the 1x1 stick, and he'll stick it in someone's ejection port or whatever and cause them to do this while they're doing like an injured shooter drill. Guys will see an Instagram video of that and not understand the context of where that is in a centrifuge progression. And they're like, oh, we could do that. We should totally throw that in our academy. It's like, okay, but you're taking this dude's drill with no idea of how he uses it and just, you know, throwing it in there. So I don't think so. Not in firearms training. Defensive tactics training, yeah, there's times to do things like that. There's times to do, you know, and maybe some of the later like scenario-based stuff, but in a basic firearms block of a basic police academy, I just don't think you have time.
Andy and I took a class years ago where they did. I don't know if Will calls it alphabet soup or something to that effect. Where I later found out, I was like, man, that drill that this instructor ran. That's something that Will does in his class. You know, a bunch of targets downrange. He set it up a little bit differently. I think all of his targets were on the same line. So it's interesting to see, and you're absolutely right how somebody takes a 2-minute video of a drill that is shot in class or a scenario that is shot as class and like, oh, that's really good. And then they just throw it in their course offering for Instagram. And it's like, hey, you have there's no contextual backing for that in what you're trying to teach. If we're looking at, and you said in the beginning of the podcast, you were talking about, you know, hey, where the learning happens is outside of the class and really, right, you're not going to see a ton of skill progression over a 1-day or 2-day course, but you want your students to take the things that they learned in that class and continue to work on those and practice those so that those skills become ingrained. If you said, hey man, this is how I want my students after taking this course to adjust their handgun practice sessions, what do you want that takeaway to be? What do you want them to start implementing in their live fire practice sessions after taking this class?
So I can tell you the biggest thing in my personal practice, which is about the most rousing endorsement I can give to anything, is this is what I personally do. Is I do a lot of drawn to a low ready, because I think plugging in automatically drawn out on the target and pressing the trigger every time is an issue. So that is a very simple thing. Having guys, okay, I'm going to draw to low ready and give a verbal challenge or something like that. That's a quick thing. And even if you don't think that's what you're going to do necessarily based off of your use case, it breaks up your thinking from every single time the gun comes out, immediately I'm going on a target and shooting. It causes you to remember that there's some thinking involved here. And so that's what I do. I'll incorporate drawn to a low ready, doing a verbal challenge, that kind of stuff. I work, trying to think, just in standard dry practice. I'll set something up and have, I don't know if you'd call it a no shoot, but I'll have something simulate. Okay, I don't want to point a muzzle at it. Like, okay, I'm going to shoot this target. I'm going to divert my muzzle safely around it, and then, dry fire or whatever at another target over here, just so I'm working at muzzle diversion and the different kind of concepts of being around live people with guns. That's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for people to take away from this, is just thinking about these concepts, because that's the number one thing. As we were talking about, you said, what's the number one thing people have issues with? It's the muzzle awareness. And the muzzle awareness is super easy to work, honestly. Because there's not a lot of things about it. It's like, okay, if I need to go around this person, you high ready, low ready, whatever your insert ready position is, moving from shooting ready position around something to shooting something else, you can do that at any time. You don't even have to actually do it. You can sit there and think about it. Like if you're watching someone, be like, okay, if that dude on the left was a shoot and that dude in the middle was a non-shoot and that other dude further on the right was another shoot, how would I shoot that and then go around him safely? Like the mental reps when it comes to that stuff, I think are just as important as the physical reps. So to answer your question, we want guys thinking about it more than anything. So there's certain things that you can incorporate in your practice, but really just thinking about the concepts and, giving it a little bit of some physical reinforcement.
That makes sense. And I know I plugged the Range Buddy app a couple times on here, but I want to kind of reiterate and remind people. And the coolest thing about that is the virtual instructor component for me. And I think, there's this part of me that I'm like, man, I don't think people really understand the benefit of it. So one of the ways that I'll set up my dry fire or my live fire, if I'm working on dry fire, I have it on the iPad, so it's a little bit larger screen, but I'll set up a couple different targets downrange. And then, one of them will be red, one of them will be green. There'll be some numbers on there. And then it will call out a random command based on those inputs. So it'll call out 3. And then it will flash a shoot or no shoot image, right? So as I'm presenting the handgun, I'm seeing, okay, is it a shoot or a no shoot? Oh, it's a no shoot. So draw to low ready or don't draw, however you want to set up that scenario.
Yes.
And then you have to find the target, right? And then, now I can incorporate, maybe I set up some intermediate targets in there that they're no shoot targets, but they're also targets that I don't need to muzzle, right? So that'll add an additional layer of complexity to that and really just kind of build on and having to think about. And it's, the decision to shoot, I think we're all going to be, it's hard for me to think of a recent shooting on video where if I put myself in that guy's shoe, the good guy's shoes, where it would be like, did I have to shoot him? Right. Yeah. So that's not to simplify it and say that, hey, if the gun comes out of the holster, but I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on before that decision is made that we need to start thinking about and working into and really kind of add into what we're already doing to work on those hard skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And last thing on the low ready thing is you see dudes on video that, and I'm not going to say whether it was or wasn't, but you mentioned, you see videos of private citizen defensive gun uses of dudes have already introduced guns into the situation. And if you do that before the shoot decision and you're not at something, like dudes will just immediately start pointing a gun at someone. Not the right decision for sure. If you're at a low ready and you haven't muzzled someone and you're legally justified to do so, say you're in your house, whatever, make up a scenario where it makes sense. But it's like, that is just one more articulated, as somebody who writes reports often when I have to use force, like having one more bullet point, like I was at a low ready position, not muzzling any piece of his body. This happened and I made the decision to shoot. So I consciously came up onto target. Like, it's just one more thing you can articulate going from a low ready to actually coming up to shoot. So, and that's one of those things that I have seen more, again, kind of bigger concept, but people talk about like the value of experience, and it might be anecdotal, but I don't think so, because me and most of the dudes that I've talked to, the difference in what people respect when you point a gun at them and they know like that you can't shoot them at that moment versus when you're at a low ready position. They called it the Metro draw in LA because all the Metro LAPD guys would draw to low ready. It was like guys respect when you come out of the holster and immediately go to that low ready and you're not pointing a gun at them yet. Like, actual criminals understand what that means. And they pick up on the cues, because then once you go from there and you actually start to come up on dudes, that changes behavior. Absolutely. So I think it's valuable to incorporate that stuff.
Actually, it gives them another step in the process as well to reflect on what is going on and what is about to happen.
Yeah.
You know, you're about an hour ahead of you're an hour ahead of us. So I want to give you the rest of the evening back. Is there anything that we should have talked about with regards to this course that we didn't touch on?
You know, I think we covered most of the stuff. Just talking about all of the main points that I can give you, you know, without guys showing up to the class. Like, hey, I guess the one thing that I said that's at the beginning of the show, I should probably say it again at the end. I am a massive proponent of hard skills. So I think you should go out and try and have the fastest draw to first shot and, you know, the best recoil control and all of this different stuff. Like, all of the stuff that these like USPSA grandmasters are way, way, way better than me at. Like, I'm a massive proponent of all that. Like, get on the Range Buddy app and shoot all these drills and do as good as you can on them. I am not one of those dudes that's like, well, you know, flat range training this and flat range training that. No, the bulk of what I do is flat range training, just like the bulk of what everyone does is flat range training. I'm not saying any of this as like a replacement for that. I'm saying this in addition to that. And I say that because I saw a video today that someone shared of, you know, some dude poo-pooing competition that was like, I only practice by going out and getting in gunfights with homeless people or something like that. And that's not me. That's not what we're saying. So guys always try and peg me and Daryl as saying certain things. I think your hard skills should be as good as they could possibly be. And this isn't a replacement. It's an addition. So that's the main thing that I want people to take away.
I love it. And that's absolutely true. Believe it or not, you can work on both of those things.
Absolutely. There are a lot of dudes out there that are highly proficient at both. There is a certain police officer that I know that obviously we won't name, that's been in like a dozen OISs, and he's a USPSA high level dude. And there's a lot of guys I know that are like that are really skilled at both and understand that you do things slightly differently in both, and that's okay. That doesn't invalidate it. So that's my quick soapbox for the night.
Andy, did you have something before we wrap? Because I wanted to add on something to that from our last class.
No, go ahead.
So in our last class, we, you know, at the end of our class, we were talking, and there was we had a couple high-level jiu-jitsu practitioners in class with us, and it was our 2-day concealed carry course here. And one of the things that she had mentioned that she really liked was the soft skills component of that class. So I just want to remind folks that it is okay to go out there and work on figuring out how to be better at talking to people in your environment and in your life, and de-escalating situations. Because calm down is not the magic phrase to get people to calm down. And I think I was watching maybe not. I think I was watching an officer-involved shooting, and the officer said, "Calm down." And I'm like, he's either dumb or he's really smart, and he's trying to ramp this guy up to escalate the situation. So that's my last little bit on there. Andy, let's kick it over to you, bud.
Yeah, I test that calm down stuff with my wife pretty often, and it just never works right for me. I don't know why, but it's a whole different story. So, David, you remind me, you said you're out of Oklahoma City?
Yep. So Daryl recently moved up to the Oklahoma City area, and so Hardwired Tactical Shooting is now fully reestablished and based in Oklahoma.
Awesome. So if I come out and take this 1-day class, tell me what I can do on day 2 to hang out. What's cool?
As far as in Oklahoma, not.
Yeah.
So Oklahoma City has a bunch of pretty cool stuff. They are actually building the world's tallest tower in the entire United States. Just got approved in Oklahoma City. So that's the newest thing, is whatever the tallest building in the U.S. is, it's about to be in downtown Oklahoma City. No, but there's the 45th Infantry Museum is awesome. It's highly underrated. Like, most people have never heard of it, but it's a military museum that has like the world's largest collection of military small arms, a bunch of tanks and planes and stuff. That's super cool. The Oklahoma City Bombing Memorial is seriously powerful. If you haven't been to Oklahoma City, there's that. Obviously, we got a lot of Oklahoma stuff going on. So if you like rodeos and things like that, there's always something to do. Oklahoma City Thunder's around here. Oklahoma City's actually, it's pretty cool. So there's always something to do.
Awesome. And I was going to ask you earlier, but I guess I'll ask anyway. I noticed all the books in the background. I was assuming that was your house. So give us a book that you'd recommend for firearms enthusiasts. What should we be reading?
Leadership and Training for the Fight. Yeah, Leadership and Training for the Fight by Paul Howe. That is a massively beneficial book, and doesn't matter if you're a firearms instructor or not. Lots of good things in there about training and just preparing for violence in general. That's the one that I always go to for everybody.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you coming on tonight, David. Just wanted to give a quick shout out. Dan Brady was going to come on with us tonight as your student. He had something going on with his life, so just wanted to say our prayers with him, and hope he's getting through what he was going through tonight, because we miss him. So, but anyway, David, thank you for coming on, and we appreciate your time, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. It was an honor.
I don't know if you guys can't hear me, can you?
We can now.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hey, I am. My internet is in the middle of freezing up, so I appreciate everybody jumping on and joining us. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection. We'll see y'all next week. Thanks again. Stay safe. And then whenever this comes back up, I'll hopefully be able to end the live stream. Are you guys still there?
Yeah,
we're still here.
It was just like a weird pause where I was like, thanks. And then it was like nothing for about 3 seconds.
Oh, this is so weird. Yeah, it's Google Chrome is not responding right now.
So we're stuck on live?
I think so. Yeah, I think we are still live.
That's awesome.
It says we're still live. So
yeah, we are. We are still live. That's cool. So Jeremy, did you get the results of that doctor appointment there that you're telling me you're having issues with? I sure did, man. Came back positive. I'm pregnant. Believe that or not? Would you believe that?
Baby elephant?
Baby elephant. That's why I've put on so much weight. I need to work on that this year, man. I got to get my stuff in gear. What in the heck?
Come do jiu-jitsu with me.
Well, my friends, I got married about 6 days ago, so I should probably go hang out with my wife. So I'm gonna hop off.
Congratulations.
I don't know why you're even here.
I appreciate you guys. Seriously, thank you.
Absolutely.
It was awesome hopping on.
Awesome.
Congrats,
Thank you so
man.
much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
All right, let me see if I can stop this and get it shut down.
Control-Alt-Delete.
I know. Let me see if
I
that
don't even
works.
know if that still works.
Oh, yeah, it does. It's not working right now for me.
All right. Well, we'll just say goodbye, and that way you can just shut it down and do a restart.
Awesome.
So anybody that's still out there listening, have a good night.
Enjoying these technical difficulties. Yep, thanks for joining us, guys. And I'll try to get my my computer figured out. What the heck?
Better block that camera.
Right?
Don't want to see you in your undies running around later.
It's too late. I'm about to. Is my camera still on right now?
Yep.
Ah,
Don't stand up.
that's weird. Everything else is like I can't do anything on my screen right now.
That's funny.
All right, I'm gonna do a hard reset.
All right, man. Later.
All right, good stuff.